Hello and welcome to the Beautiful Business Podcast, where today I'm thrilled to be joined by the wonderful Nils Leonard, co founder of Uncommon. Uncommon is a global creative studio with too many awards to list and with a tagline that tells us exactly what they're doing, which is building brands that people in the real world actually wish existed. They are one of, if not the fastest growing startup of this generation, one of the only majority female founded studios of their size and impact, and most importantly, they have a studio that they proudly see as a provocative brand across the world. They are certainly creating an incredible impact. So today I'm really excited to chat with Niels about branding. In an age of so many brands and where we are all our own personal brand, what even is a brand now and how do we make it authentic? I'm excited to find out.
So I will never forget, really early in my career, there was a leaving do and someone said, I was at ... when blah, blah, blah. And I think if you run a beautiful business, that's really what it means. It means that at some point someone will say, I was there then. And I really think that concept with the idea of Uncommon in my mind, fantasizing that we are a beautiful business, it's the dream that someone will say, I was at Uncommon when they made the 1-second suit, or I was at Uncommon when they did Britain Get Talking, or I was at Uncommon when, they did that BA work. And really that's all you can dream about, is mattering enough that someone might mention the name of a company that you had, that you dreamt of and then you made. That's probably it.
Welcome to the Beautiful Business Podcast from the Wow Company. If you're searching for the right strategies, tools, and connections to ignite your thinking and elevate your business, then join us for a fortnightly dose of inspiration. Our guests range from industry-leading agencies and cutting-edge tech pioneers to motivational speakers and executives, all offering actionable insights to help you thrive in profit and purpose. So, whether you're a growing consultancy or an agency leader, this podcast is your source of knowledge and encouragement to spark meaningful change in your business and beyond.
Niels, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm actually really excited to have you here.
Thank you, mate. It's good to be here.
Great. I basically ask everyone this question. You've got such an extensive sort of list of accomplishments that we can find out about you online. Tell us something about you that we might not already know.
My dad was a tattooist and a biker, and as a result, I have no tattoos because I rebelled. So actually, maybe that's something that most people probably don't know, is that I rebelled somehow by getting no tattoos and being deeply conventional and getting a proper job.
That's amazing. I feel like it might be an unheard of parenting tactic to try and keep everyone on the straight and narrow.
Honestly, I couldn't have gone more off the straight and narrow than my dad. So in some ways, yeah, that kind of works.
Let's go to Uncommon, shall we? Let's talk about Uncommon. So it's relatively young, right? Was it 2017 you guys started?
Yeah, we're 7 years old now. I mean, it doesn't, that's starting to really actually sound old.
Yeah, a little bit when you say it like that. Yeah.
I know. I still talk about us as a startup with you because we still feel very much like that, as in the energy of it still feels incredibly vital. It still feels incredibly vulnerable. We still feel, very personally about it. But yeah, we're about 7 years old. We've got studios in London, New York, and Stockholm. About 300 people, something like that, probably.
Absolutely. And talk to us about it. Like so is it where you envisioned it being when you first started?
We're always very mechanical. We didn't just open up and say, hello, we're quite good. We opened up and said, look, here's what we're for. Here's our vision. Here's our mission. And really we said to ourselves, what are we going to be about? And we sort of remember these conversations in previous worlds where it was about the awards you might win or whatever. And we said, actually, that's sort of bollocks, isn't it? Because once you've won some of those, what then? And we said that we wanted to do a couple of things. One was be on the receiving end of the most important and influential briefs of our time. That was something we wrote. And I think actually that's definitely true of some of the briefs we've got, some of the brands we work with, some of the opportunities we've had, from British Airways through to, things like the EAFC rebrand. That's the biggest entertainment rebrand in history. So things like that are kind of insane when I think about it. And, having built Britain Get Talking, things like that in the UK, it's the biggest mental health campaign in UK history, and it's like, I look at that and I'm just incredibly proud and feel incredibly blessed that we've had the opportunity to do that stuff. So some of it, yeah. There's always learnings, I actually think we could have gone further, probably faster actually. If, there's some turning points and some decisions we made, I think I'd go back and I'd maybe be a bit more headstrong and stuff like that, but I think that's where we wanted to be. And, we talked, the other thing we did was someone, and I've said this on other podcasts, so I'll rattle through it, but we said, the creation of Uncommon was a response to a question I was asked back at Grey before we started. And someone said, how do we go from being a brand that sells crap to people to being a brand that people wish existed? And I thought about that on their behalf at the time. They were a client. And then I thought about it on ours. And I was like, God, name an agency or studio. I don't think we're there on that yet. And I think we're trying. But I think everything from the startup brands to Bring Get Talking to things like Rap Boot, weirdly, in the States, are starting to put us into the conversations of normal people and the conversations happening in mainstream press. And that's been the dream of the studio.
Amazing. Yeah, so much to be proud of. And I love that there's still stuff there that you're striving for, right? That's what makes it all.
Yeah, God, we're definitely not there. I mean, God, think about, I don't know. I just look at the world, and especially the way the world is changing, and the fact that, we're able to play a part now in much bigger conversations. And, the fact we're moving to built environment and physical spaces and architecture and things like that. I find all that so exciting. So I feel weirdly like we're still at the start of a journey, although we're 7 years old. So I don't know.
Amazing. Okay, so we're here today to talk about brands, right? And about branding, as it were. Let's just start, I guess, with the core question. What does an authentic brand mean to you? Like, what does it look like to you?
Most brands are born because somebody is either, I would argue, the most radically creative brands certainly are born of a frustration, or they're born of a panic, or they're born of an urgent need for something that doesn't exist. And as a result, they tend to be very expressive of a founder or a vision or a view. I've heard some brilliant stuff that brand is basically what people say when you're not in the room. And I've always loved that expression, that ultimately the world's best people find a way to leave you with an impression of their company in a way that stays in here, in your heart and in your mind, and in a way that you would recall or refer to, and I think when you talk about brand, that's really what it is. It's an energy and it's a story and it's a narrative. But the best brands, I think the most impactful ones, the ones that people wish existed, to my earlier question, are the ones that really do have a point to prove, I think, in the world. And I think people misuse the word purpose, but when we talk about brands, you would never meet a human without a purpose or a want or a desire. Why would you meet a brand without one? And I always find that so galling. So I look at it and go, look, when you have a brand and the idea of a brand, that's really a decision-making tool. So the world's best brands know who they're for and against. The world's best brands know who their friends would be and who their enemies would be. They know who to collaborate with and who not to. And they're able to make these decisions incredibly quickly because they have such a clear idea of what they're about and what they're trying to do in the world. And so that's what I would say by brand. I'm sure there's lots of far more articulate planner versions of it, but a lot of the work we do starts with what we call, the fire inside, or really at the heart of a brand. And a lot of the best work we do starts internally with the brands we work with, be it British Airways or, ITV, and really what it means to work there for that brand. So forgive me, but I think really companies are buildings full of people, aren't they? And a brand is what holds those people together and gets them out of bed in the morning, arguably.
Amazing. Something quite poetic about that. What about when we come to personal brand, right? In a world where we've just got influencers left, right, center. I mean, how important is personal brand, and is it kind of helping? Is it hindering having all this influencer culture?
Well, it's a disgusting term, isn't it? I mean, it's got the ick of LinkedIn around it, personal brand, and look, forgive me, I've met Stephen Bartlett, but there's a load of that he's arguably responsible for when he talks about personal brand. I think the idea of people having an impact and occupying, if you think about the conversation we've just had around brand and what it might mean, that word occupies an energy and a reason for being and a point of view. Well, of course, people should have that. People should have that, and the best of us have that. In spades, they have that ability for you to refer to them, either in hindsight or at a distance. And I think it's huge. I think if we're talking about it with a view to a personal brand growing another brand or becoming part of another brand, I think it's absolutely massive. And I think really that's about your impact as a storyteller and as a leader and as an influence. And I mean that outside of the word influencer. I mean genuinely the ability to influence a room, to influence a decision. I think it's huge. What I would say as well is, because the world has opened up the way it has, articulations become exponentially important. The ability for a leader or a representative of a brand to articulate the decision-making process and why they're there and why they go to work and their passion and their energy, that's become huge. So I think it's massively important. I don't buy that everybody should be getting incredibly comfortable with recording themselves and wanging on. I think there's a lot of gigabyte landfill of people saying things that they've heard other people say, and and then saying it under their own banner and saying that they're bringing some sort of learning. I don't think the world needs any more of that. But God, the world needs special people. I remember working with Nick Cave. He's a decent example on the documentary we made with him. And I cannot tell you, like, I walked into the room originally fizzing with energy. Oh my God, I'm on the Nick Cave shoot. This is so amazing. And him and Warren create this energy around them, which is a deep sense of calm. And I don't know how they do it, but within 10 minutes, I'd slowed my conversation to half the speed. I was thinking about every word that I said. I was actively listening. I was somehow more generous of spirit. It's like, and that's those people's influence on that room. Now, I don't know whether that's fucking personal brand or not, but that I would argue, and the ability, you can then suddenly, having met the guy, you can hear that in the music, you can see that in the film, you can imagine every interaction is the same. And so I think that if you have that ability and can foster that ability, that's amazing. But isn't that ultimately just learning to be a really good human? My wife takes the piss out of me for having heroes. But I think that's how. I think have heroes and villains and chase people and steal from them. And learn the things you like and don't like about them. And I think that is a way to become a better human, isn't it? That sounds incredibly obvious. What the fuck are we talking about? But I've always really done that. And I've always been surprised by people that say they don't have heroes. How can you possibly not have, in my head, I find it impossible to believe. And I don't mean heroes like, oh my God, I'd throw myself off a cliff for them. I just mean the world is a better place, I think, for them being in it. And if I could adopt 10% of their wisdom or ambition or, whatever it is, I would do it.
No, I think that also comes down to, you have these heroes, but it falls to their values, really, doesn't it? Always comes back to what values they're demonstrating and what you want to put out in the world as well.
Yeah, I think so.
You mentioned earlier, and a bit there as well, about kind of that internal culture sort of influencing the external brand, as it were. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on that?
Someone asked me ages ago what I thought the best people did. And I think the best people make everyone else around them better. And I really analyzed that and really pushed at what I meant. Like, I took their question really seriously, and I was like, and then it dawned on me after I gave a speech somewhere, and Robert Saville from Mother said the cruelest and most accurate thing to me. He said, that was really good, thanks, mate. I was like, oh, all right, cheers. And he said, I've seen you sometimes and it's been rubbish. And I was like, oh, fuck. And he said, do you know what the difference is? And this is years ago. And he said, the difference is when you speak to talent, you speak from your heart, you're really authentic, it's really moving. And said, when you're trying to be clever and you're trying to speak to clients, he said, it's sort of boring and a bit, and he was very lovely of him to be that honest, but I never forgot it. And then I thought to myself, I'm going to do everything around talent. And the reason I say all this is, if every conversation you have is a chance, I would argue you lift all of the boats never mind the output you put out and the work you make. And so I think people misuse the word culture. I think it's come to mean water slides in an office or a fucking beanbag. And I actually think it's not that. It's the mechanics and behaviors you adopt every day. It's the questions you ask in every room. It's the nature of your forgiveness or your listening. All these things say to the people around you, this is what matters here. And as a result, they either will charge through lightning for you or won't. And so I think that's incredibly important. And I think some of the superpowers at Uncommon are not just an ability to adopt some of those behaviors, but we're strangely mechanical in that way. Like we ask questions of all the work. We don't believe that fame is an accident or a lucky thing. like there are a series of questions that we ask of a certain project that are going to make it famous. There are a series of questions we ask of the client that are going to mean they're right for us or wrong. And I think the more concrete a culture is in that sense, the more powerful.
Are they like the same questions every time, or is it the answers really that you're looking for? And
They are the same. I think otherwise you don't know what weighs up. Like when people say, I want a really good idea, what's your definition of a good idea? Like, go on, Craig, tell me what's a good idea?
well, it depends in what context we're talking about, right?
So many people go into the room and they assume, don't they? They kind of, and clients do the same. Clients go, I want a big idea. Well, their version of a big idea might be a consistent one, or it might be a famous one, or it might be whatever. And it dawned on us that in agencies, certainly, in studios and design studios, a lot of it is this inferred vision of somebody that you're trying to get to. And I just thought that was incredibly unfair. That you were all trying to live up to one creative director's version of events, and you weren't really sure what worked for them or not. And I thought, wouldn't it be amazing to have a culture where that wasn't the case? Where we said, okay, what about this dances on a friction in culture? What about this will be referred to, shared, or passed on? What about this will be talked about in 10 years? How will this reach people? What will they say about it? How would they send it to a friend? All these things are really, really important questions at Uncommon because they force you to crystallize what the idea is. So we tend to ask, other people might use different language, but we tend to ask the same questions of the process.
You've got an article on your website that I was reading, and I think it was titled "Is Advertising Dead?" And I think to summarize it very, very quickly, I think you said the question isn't whether advertising is dead. The question is who killed it. And it just got me thinking, how difficult is it to build a brand now from nothing, whether you're a startup to whether you want to reform your identity? In this day and age, it just got me kind of going off on a bit of a tangent, but I just thought, how difficult is it now, do you think?
I think in the context of that phrase, if no one's read that article, it sounds like I'm saying it's all fucked. Actually, the point of the article was arguably advertising as we know it has become something else. It's become service-based industry where we sell integration and synergy and consistency and assets and content and all this other stuff. But the thing we've forgotten to sell and charge handsomely for is creativity. And I don't think creativity is dead at all. I think it's precious. I think it's the secret to Uncommon's, journey. And I guess my point was that was the thing that most people had missed. And our industry had conned itself into selling something that anybody could sell. And I think that really is just the definition of lunacy, where you remove the superpower of your industry and adopt something arguably that definitely AI, but frankly, everybody else could sell. When you ask that question in the context of brands, I don't think it's ever been easier to start a brand, but building a good one is the same as it's always been. It's difficult. It requires wisdom. It requires a fight. It requires all of the stuff it's always required, I would argue. I think the tools have never been more accessible for anyone to build one, and I think that's joyous. I always loved, if no one's seen it, Virgil Abloh has a website called Free Game that he created before he passed, which is just an example of him as Jesus, talk about personal brand, or an example of him as an amazing human, where he basically decoded the ways for anybody to start an amazing fashion lifestyle brand, and he compiles how to obtain a trademark through to how to design, how to get blanks, how to do whatever. You should look at that. So I think it's never been easier, but I think as a result, it's probably never been easier to be the same as everybody else. And I think the same radical sense of bravery and liberation applies if you're going to try and start something new, and particularly if you're going to start something that genuinely matters. I've always loved Dave Hyatt referenced Yves Chenard, the guy from Patagonia, and he said, look, arguably the best businesses, the best brands, and I mean literally the very best, aren't in the business of being fast. They're in the business of being slow, and we're addicted to speed. And that we have a magazine called Fast Company, and we have hustle culture, and we have all of these words and these behaviors attached to speed. But actually brands that we're going to refer to in 50 years, and are going to still be loving and adopting and talking about, they're grown over time with impact and with real intent.
That's so interesting that you talk about the time. I literally watched a video clip on Instagram earlier of someone who was on Stephen Bartlett's podcast, actually, who said that actually we need to speed everything up, and that the reason that they're successful, and by successful they measured it as billionaires, the reason that they're successful is because they just do everything quicker than everyone
Yeah,
else.
I think speed in our industry, by the way, and definitely the speed between something being a concept and something being reality, in regards to running a studio, is incredibly important, massively important, because later means never, but also because I think the world has never been so in a similar space, seeing as similar things. Therefore, you are, whether you like it or not, in a race with others to define your version of events, and the studios that are able to make more and make faster win. I don't. That might be his. I've not seen that interview, but that might be somebody's secret to success of making lots of money. I guess what I was talking about, which I think is attached to making lots of money, is also they becoming a reference point. I saw someone talking about this concept of classic implications. It was cringe-makingly and embarrassingly for me. It was Kevin Costner, I think. And they asked him about a movie he was making, and they said, "Oh, how important is the box office weekend?" And he said, "I focus less on that. I want my films to have classic implications." And by that, he meant matter be referred to, be talked about in 50 years. And I just thought, what an amazing term for a studio to have classic implications. Peter Saville has classic implications, Jerzy Müller-Brockman has classic implications. Virgil Abloh has classic implications. That's a slightly different journey, I think.
So is that what you would consider then? Like, I just mentioned about, to them, money was the success. Do you think it is that kind of that name ringing in your ear in 10 years' time?
This is my or our version of events. It doesn't mean it has to be anyone else's. And by the way, I think money is important. And, I come from a background where I didn't have a lot of it at all. And I know how hard life can be when you're in that. And I was very driven by that, and I didn't want to fucking be there. But it dawned on me that that's also an unsustainable version of success, because it doesn't actually make you happy. So, I think that I looked a bit harder for what might move me and what might really bring a sense of satisfaction. And really, I thought it was the ability to matter, and the ability to be in the world, and for people to refer to you, and to, for a brief moment, that your work or your endeavors were seen and witnessed. I think that's really important. We're a making studio. We're not passengers. I don't want to be in the business of briefly contributed to the world of content in the 2000s. What the fuck? Who wants to do that for a job? And some people, have a very healthy angle on the world, and this doesn't matter at all. But I think if you're going to spend 10 hours a day caring and grafting and making things that didn't exist before, I think you have to believe that it matters, and you have to believe that it's somehow additive and is improving the state of things. And I don't mean necessarily purpose. I mean, it can give you a laugh, it can make you cry, it could be something, tiny, but I think you have to believe that it matters somehow. And I think that's what really fuels the studio. I think I have a lot of people in the studio who see the world that way.
How do you think consumer demand is kind of changing branding?
I think the way people live now is changing the need for brands to have spokespeople, the need for brands to be deeper, the need for brands to have a story outside of, "I'd like to sell you some cheese." Brands like Oatly, weirdly, have made a benefit of the fact they don't have necessarily a massively deep story, and they've just gone, "We're all about personality, buy our fucking milk." And I think that's kind of funny. But I think the truth is that people innately have, because of the internet and all of the above, a deeper ability to study your brand and get under the surface of it and find all the details out. Rebrands used to be the dark arts. No one would ever talk about them, and they would just appear. Nowadays, every rebrand of any sort is discussed by the general public on social media. It's weird, right? So I look at the whole thing and go, God, that's all changed. And the world has a more healthy and or unhealthy, ability to go searching in your brand for what it's really about. So I think that sense of depth is massively required. I think brands have to be quicker to pivot and change and respond than they've ever been. But I'm really talking about, again, just human skills in the world we live in. I don't know if that's a response to branding. I think Uncommon's approach to branding right now, which maybe even in a design and narrative sense is worth talking about, is slightly different maybe to other studios, in that we do try to even use design, which I think has previously been a conversation around either simplicity or beauty or whatever. We really look at design as an opportunity for that brand to tell its story and to be more famous. And I don't know how many studios drive the concept of fame or remarkability into a rebrand, but the FC rebrand is a case in point for that. The idea that we discovered a story where we said, look, this icon's been hiding in plain sight inside this brand for 20 years, the control triangle, all that stuff that gave that brand far more than just, here's the new logo for the new game. It gave it a story it could tell to people as it arrived and a way of involving them in the conversation. And I think that sort of stuff is underused. So I think the opportunity is there for people who want to do it to tell a deeper story in a brand, if they want to. I don't know if that's an answer, but I find that thrilling.
I can't help but think about how Uncommon has kind of gone into these different cultures, right? You said you were in London, you're in New York, you're in Stockholm. And when we were chatting before, you mentioned that when you first started, it was like, yeah, you're going to be great for startups. And then, as you grew, it's like, yeah, you're going to be great, for the UK. And then all of a sudden, here you are. How have you managed that?
I think there's an engine. Oh God, I think there's all sorts of dysfunctional shit in here. I think there's an engine room. The story I told you where I was like, people were saying ... that we were only good on startups or whatever. I'm very fueled by that. I think Uncommon is. And will it work? Won't it? There's a lot of passengers. There's a lot of cynics. There's a lot of shit talking in our industry. Frankly, I think 75% of it is people sat on the sidelines observing it with some sort of relish as it dies. And I don't know another industry like that, but I find that incredibly upsetting. And I'm quite driven by it. So, there's a bit of sometimes I feel like giving up, and then I remember I've got a lot of motherfuckers to prove wrong about it. And I think that it's important to say though, because energy, I think, drives everything. And I think you see and feel a brand when its founders or leaders are tired. And I mean tired in the biggest sense. I think when cynicism creeps in, when it becomes Groundhog Year, I think you feel brands where that happens and they kind of go to sleep. And I think as a result, they wane. I think the studio has a massive point to prove still. I really do. And personally, and just the studio, I don't think we've managed to, as we talked about earlier, achieve the reach or the impact that we dreamt of yet. I went and visited the 9/11 memorials in New York and was just blown away, really blown away. I mean, obviously the subject matter is huge, don't get me wrong, but I literally marveled at the idea of them, that they just go endlessly down, and I was just like, I was moved, man. I smashed to bits by it. And I thought to myself, I was jealous, right or wrong. The bit inside me went, I wish we'd made those. I wish Uncommon had made those. I wish I could say in 50 years, fuck, we did that. That's where we want to play. That altitude is where I think the studio wants to play. So we're nowhere near done. And I think that energy is going to push us forwards. I also think we haven't learned yet that there isn't a market or a discipline that we would argue we can't improve or play a part in. I think the design practice within the studio is huge and respected. And I think we have a very different blast radius in that world to other design studios. And some I respect massively, but I think we do something they don't do. And I think that's probably true in PR, probably true in experience. We just won a global pitch for a retail store design, which I'm over the moon about. Shops, what's the role of a physical shop now? What do they mean? Are they stages really more than shops? Probably. And I think Uncommon in that world. I think we can, and hopefully some people can imagine what we might do there. So I'm just thrilled by it all. And honestly, I know it sounds funny, there isn't another us. I think if I were really feeling like, oh shit, we're basically the same as everyone else, I think I might try and do something else. But I'm not feeling like that. And really, that's the secret, I think.
Yeah. I can definitely see the excitement when you talk about it as well. And that's so important, right? Just to have that passion for it. You've got to have that to really make that difference.
We take it all really personally. There was a guy, this is a weird story. I've not told this story either. You're getting loads out of me. I wrote an article once about my ideal creative, and it was my first brush with fame, I suppose, or whatever the word is. They asked me to write an article about my ideal creative, and they entitled the article Fierce, Fearless, and Female. And they did that because I wrote a list of the qualities I thought the right creative would inhabit, the ability to make fame or blah, blah, blah. But the first word every time was she. She will be, she will be. And at that point, I wrote that primarily because the best creative I was working with was Vicky Maguire. And I thought, fuck, I'll just put she. It went viral though, particularly in the States. And lots of people were talking about it and half the people were hating on it, really hating on it. Most of whom were men, obviously, who were feeling threatened or like I'd written something that wasn't for them or whatever. Super strange. And half the people loved it. And don't get me wrong, some women hated it too. And it's just important to say that. But one thing that happened was someone on Twitter really, really started flagging me off. And, they were saying kind of personal things. It became kind of abuse. But I looked at their Twitter handle and I was like, oh, you work at this agency in the States. And so I called them and I just rang up and said, hey, can I speak to blah? They work there. And they were like, yep, here's a cell. And they gave me a cell and I called him. I said, hi, you don't know me, but you're barracking me on Twitter. And I just want to let you know that you're 9 hours away and I can get on a plane and come see you. And I think we should have a conversation. And by the way, I know your boss. I used to work with him. And this guy, shit himself. And because no one had ever made it real. The point I'm trying to make, is I've always taken it very personally. I've always believed the world is a very small place. And right or wrong, the opportunities that come with that, I think, make me believe that anything's possible. And so when you say the studio like that, I take it incredibly personally, be it good or bad. It doesn't mean I want everyone to love us, by the way. I just think I have a very active awareness that everything we do could matter and that everything we do could be talked about and change things. And I think that's a form of fuel.
I bet that person piped down after that as well, huh?
He went really quiet. It was
Yeah.
fun. It just taught me so much, right or wrong, and there was someone else, there was a lady that tried to have an article published, which was pretty scathing too at the time. And I rang her and she just burst into tears and said, I'm really sorry, I was having a bad day. And I was like, you don't get to do that. You don't get to try and publish an article about me and tell me you're having a fucking bad day, man. You don't get to do that. And, I just think that I think if more of people in this industry maybe viewed it that way and viewed the world as small and viewed the ability to impact each other as a gift, we might be in a different place.
That's so interesting though, isn't it?
I want the studio talks about, he came to the studio. He's a brilliant creative, Sam. If you don't know him, he's exceptional. He's one of the best creative leaders in America for sure. And he came to the studio to make work that mattered and work that people in the real world talked about and all that other stuff. And I said, right, go make the studio famous. And he looked at New York Fashion Week and he said, okay, there are 8 billion people in New York. There are 4 million rats. I'm going to make a pair of boots called Rat Boot. And rats are going to live in the soles of these boots. I'm going to make one pair. I was like, it's nonsense. I love it. It's like, I think it will get talked about. Let's do it. The model show, we were due to launch this at a catwalk show. The day before she showed up for the fitting, she couldn't walk in them. They're really fucking heavy. And so she's like falling over in the studio. I was like, oh God, this is a disaster. How are we going to get her there? So I said, look, do me a favor, just go and walk up and down the road on Spring Street a couple of times. So she goes downstairs. She walks down to the end of Spring Street. There's 25 people filming already in Soho, filming her. One of those films gets 130 million views.
Wow.
130 million views. That's more than a Super Bowl. And it taught, like, I was like, God, if you think the world is primed for fame, New York is a different breed.
Yeah.
This is crazy. And I was like, but honestly, how thrilling. The idea that what we make could make out of nothing, we could put on the road with no explanation, rhyme or reason, and 130, 40 million people could talk about it, send it round. I was like, that is amazing.
Mind blowing.
Yeah. So if you ever doubt that it matters or doubt that your idea will hit, I would argue just take the fucking chance, because I think more of us talk ourselves out of things than believe in the possibility that it might work.
And worst case scenario, just take it to New York because
Literally.
I know you've got all of these aspirations on where you want Uncommon to go. I'd love to hear how you sort of bring boundaries into this. How, not just for you, not just for Uncommon, I mean, for a lot of agencies over the last year or two, it's been tough, right? So, there's this almost this worry or concern that if you've got strict boundaries that maybe you're going to shut doors or you're not going to find what you need to find. So talk to me about your thoughts with boundaries.
We've always been pretty ferocious about that. What I've learned is we started out, we won't work with gambling clients. We won't sell cigarettes. There's things like that we won't do. And actually every other conversation, be it say fast food or other things, are a founder-led conversation around our values, because our business is a translation of our values. So we have those in real time. What I've really learned is that there are certain clients that are right or wrong for us, and there's nothing to do with their category at all. We've learned that clients in a moment of change tend to be more right for us, because they tend to have an energy and a fuel and an ambition for a project that means they're going to try something that maybe hasn't been tried before. We don't tend to be for clients that want a slightly different shade of blue, or, they want to tidy it all up. Pitches where they're like, we want it to be slightly more consistent. I'm like, we tend to not take part in those. But the biggest tell is we ask this question every time we meet a client for the first time. We say, why are you here? And I never used to ask that question. I used to be so desperate for them to see my work and think I was great and win, that I never used to ask that question. As a result, I ended up working with people that didn't want to make what I wanted to make, because they were there for a different reason. And I never asked. So we ask it now. And if they say, well, I saw the British Airways work, or I saw the B&Q work, and actually we want to build a life, or we want a bit of this, then we're off to a good start, because it means they understand what we make and they want a bit of that. That's great. Or if they say, I saw you speak and I saw you talk about X, that's all good. When they say, we saw your work on your website, we think you might be quite good, I'm like, well, you're lying, because our work's quite hard to find and our website really doesn't have any work on it. It's got a shop on it. So we tend to sort of be quite ferocious about that, and so that's the biggest thing I'd say is we really do work with people who have a personal view of our business and the work we've made and want to translate a version of that. And I don't know how many shops do that, but we're very keen on that. The other thing we try to do is really only work with clients that really do want to make something. And I'd argue not everyone does. Some clients want to spend their job and their lives and their career going from job to job, going to meetings, going through the process of work, as opposed to making things that they put out into the world. And I think a lot of people want to do that because there's more risk attached to that and all the above. But we are a studio. We make, we're not in the business of decks. We're not in the business of 12 months, in the washing machine, wanging on at meetings. And we make that very clear to people. So we say, look, at some point we want to be making an output. We have something called FAF tax, which is the concept which we've never had to enforce, but it's the concept that if you join Uncommon and you haven't made something within 6 months of partnering with us, then we're going to charge you 25% more.
Wow.
It's critical when you're a real startup. Year one, I was like, if we don't make work, we're invisible. Like literally fucking invisible. Like if you don't have an output, what are you telling people it is you do? It's the evidence of your beliefs. So I was like, God, if we're not making, we're dead. And so we were like, we have to make this mission critical. It's not about money, it's about making. And unless others can see our output, how could they possibly be attracted to us to give us more business? So that's been massive.
I want to just loop back to that first question that you said, where you started asking people why they're here. Talk to me about the moment that you started using that, or when you decided you were going to start using that. Like, was that just something that kind of slipped in one day, or was it actually quite a scary change for you to put those boundaries in place?
Yeah, we had a standing start. We couldn't have any clients when we opened. I was being sued by Sir Martin Sorrell. He was quite angry with us for leaving. And as a result, we had no clients when we opened the doors. And so day 2 or something, we got a phone call from a platform, I won't say who, and it was huge. And they were like, we've got this money and it's this. And we were like, oh my God, that's amazing. And we just got on with it. And then 2 weeks in, they were asking us to make really bad stuff. We were arguing, Lucy and I were arguing, kicking lumps out of each other. And I was like, this is shit. We got to walk away. And so we walked away, and it was the best thing we did. The very next day, we got a call from OVO Energy and ended up making, the Slayer ad that frankly could have been an ad for Uncommon as much as them. The reason I say that is the very first thing I asked the OVO client was, why have you come? And they went, I've just read all that guff in your press release. And if that's true, that's the brand we want to be. And as a result, they were far more likely to buy the work. And I was like, we just have to, that's the game. That's it. The industry is no more complicated than that. Do you want what we actually make?
Okay, cool. Let's move to kind of the future of stuff then, shall we? Do you foresee any upcoming trends, or I don't know, do you have any foresight that you think will make it either more challenging or easier to work and create amazing brands?
I think the best people will find a way to work outside of the algorithms. They'll make things that cut through them. I think they're becoming two sorts of problem really. One is that they're starting to dictate a style and shape of work, and I don't just mean short form content. I mean everything about the way that that's conducted, everything about how influencers are used, and that's a problem because it's making everything the same, and then it just becomes a best use of 6-second influencer contest. At which point it's just rubbish. The other problem is that we're all seeing the same stuff. So you and I, whether we like it or not, you might have more interest in cats. I might like home design more. But ultimately on Instagram, I'd argue 60% of the shit we're seeing is probably the same. That's also a fucking problem because it means our diversity of inspiration is shrinking. I think the best companies, and I mean this way outside the ad industry, from art collectives to artists to music to fashion, always found a way and still find a way to cut through that. Alexander McQueen was my example back in the day. You know, he viewed the collection he designed as half the job. You know, the other task would then be the runway shows, the drama, the spectacle, the controversy. You know, how was a high fashion designer on page 4 of The Sun, you know, every 2 weeks? You know, and so I think the best of us will find a way to with our brands, with our message. I don't just mean adverts. I mean everything we do with the behaviors of the brand, with its commentary, with its packaging, with its design, to cut straight through that and to find a way to be celebrated and remarked on and passed on in culture way outside of those algorithms. I think that's just a game we should all start to fucking learn. And I think if we all learnt it, by the way, the world would be a far more inspiring place. I think that's definitely true. I think a return to physicality, or rather a redefinition of what it means to have a shop or a place or a HQ. I think that's going to be joyous. I think we don't need shops now, so we have to want them. And, you know, the idea of going somewhere physical that not everybody can go and questing to that place, you know, has been true of restaurants for years. You know, you look at Faviken and you look at, you know, El Bulli and all these places, you know, people from all over the world traveling for this 1 3-hour experience in a tiny place in northern Spain. I'm like, fuck, how beautiful, what an amazing concept. But why, you know, and some of the best brands are embracing this, where you go, well, we're going to make an experience and it's going to last for a very short period of time. And there's only a few people that are going to get to go. And it's going to be amazing. And would you like to play a part in it? And I think the return to physicality, to design, to experience, in the biggest sense of the word, to tactility, to energy, I think is going to be beautiful to behold. And I think design as a conversation in that sense is going to be massive. And then lastly, I think everything's going to move. So I think the rest of the majority of the world is going to find its way onto a screen. So I think that if you're not thinking about either an active straying away from that for your brand, you need to be thinking about how you're going to feature on a screen and how beautifully you can feature on a screen. You know, even 7 years ago, brand design documents never included motion. They just wouldn't even talk about it. And now I'd argue 80% of your brand probably moves. So how does it move? How does the typography move? How can you represent a premium brand in a moving image space? You know, what does that mean? I think is just a lovely conversation too. So, I mean, these are small things, I suppose, but I find them interesting.
Yeah, and exciting, rather than kind of, I don't know, in some ways it might feel like a scary future with like AI and all this stuff that might be coming into play. But actually, when you talk about it, I'm like, yeah, that sounds
I
great.
mean, look, AI's a worry in that it's going to put a dent in things. I see things on it. Like one, yes, you can probably write 6 out of 10 copy with ChatGPT. But the thing that dawned on me is like, an AI will grow and change, but AI, you know, hasn't lost somebody. AI couldn't understand grief or jealousy or rage or the need to be a nemesis or all those other human fuckery things. I don't think it remotely would understand how powerful it is in the human experience to have built the 9/11 memorials. And so I just be moved by it, be reassured by it, AI. It's removing the bit that anybody could do and leaving us with the bit that only we can do. And the other thing I would just sort of say on AI is like, I read something the other day that said the threat isn't that an army of robots come and, you know, take over the world, actually. The threat is that your insurance claim will be made up by, the decision on your insurance claim will be made up by, it's going to be the middleman. And so that is a threat, and it is annoying, but it's not stealing our thunder. And so we should be liberated by that, I think.
Agreed. And what about the future for Uncommon then? What are your plans? What are you doing?
Yeah, we're going to build some buildings. That's what we want to do. We want to build buildings. I mean, I was really annoyed. Thomas Heatherwick, he's a friend and a partner of the studio. He's a brilliant architect if you don't know him. He's a very, very articulate human. But he said the most depressing thing to me once, and it haunted me. We were chatting and he went, "Oh, Niels, that was great, that campaign." He said, "How long did that take you?" I was like, 6 to 9 months in total, something like that. Well, that's interesting. He said, "It's really interesting, isn't it? It last for like 3 weeks?" And I was like, "Oh, God, here we go." And then he went, "We'll work for 3 years on a building, but it will last for 200 years." And I was like, "Oh, okay. Yeah, okay." And so if I'm serious about us trying to matter and to be a reference point and to be something, then I think built environment, or the idea of it, is a beautiful place to play. I also just think where that crosses the line into brands, I think all of these lines are blurring in such a beautiful way. Brands need a HQ. That's a building that's built. They need shops. Those are things you go in. The experience between the word brand and the reality of it is up for grabs. And that's everything from design to advertising to storytelling to, all of it. And I just think that's such a fascinating space to play. If you view the world like that instead of here's our little chunk, then what a beautiful chance to matter in the world for people. And I love that. We're going to launch more of our own brands too. I think Uncommon is a force in its own right. Not just things like Rat Boot, but everything from sex brands that we own to Halo to others. I think we really, really enjoy putting our own brands into the world and trying to make our dent in that way too. Biggest thing, Chloe, for me is that I was really thinking as we opened these studios, what that meant, and someone said, "Oh, you're great. You're a network now." And I was like, "Ugh." And so I went off to beat myself up and think quite hard about why we were doing it. And this is the answer. I have Sam Shepard in New York. I've got Bjorn Stahl and Max in Stockholm, and countless brilliant people in London. And I look at those people and go, sincerely, they are some of the best creatives in the world right now. And I think the dream of Uncommon is a photograph at some point in the next 5 years where I look at and capture all of the talent that sit within the studio. And I want to look at that, and I want people to look at that and go, that's ridiculous. They've got fucking everybody. That's what I want. And I'm like, if I can do that, I know everything else will follow. But if you told me that I could have a snapshot of creativity in the world and that we were responsible for that snapshot, for some of the best creative minds, and that they found a home at Uncommon, that would be amazing.
Well, I, for one, can't wait to see that snapshot. Nils, we ask everyone this question as well. I need to know, and I feel like I've kind of got a concept, but I can't wait to hear you articulate this. What does beautiful business mean to you?
So I will never forget, really early in my career, there was a leaving do, and someone said, I was at ... when blah, blah, blah. And I think if you run a beautiful business, that's really what it means. It means that at some point, someone will say, I was there then. And I really think that concept with the idea of Uncommon in my mind, fantasizing that we are a beautiful business, it's the dream that someone will say, I was at Uncommon when they made the 1 second suit, or I was at Uncommon when they did Britain Get Talking, or, I was at Uncommon when, they did that BA work. And really that's all you can dream about, is mattering enough that someone might mention the name of a company that you had, that you dreamt of, and then you made. That's probably it.
That's incredible. And I knew you'd articulate it. You looked at me like, oh, am I going to be able to do this? But yeah, I knew you would. Niels, I've absolutely loved chatting to you about this today. I think your passion for it and your love for it and everything about it just oozes when you talk. And I think it's contagious. Really, I do. So thank you so much for talking.
Thank you. And thanks for taking the time and asking great questions today.
Not at all. Have a good rest of your day.
See you.
Thank you for listening to the Beautiful Business Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, then please remember to subscribe and leave us a review. For more advice and practical tips on what it's really like to build a beautiful business, visit our content hub at wowco.uk/hub or check out the link in the show notes.